Just gonna wait. Usually, oh, there we go. Live streaming. All right. Good morning. Those of you who were on the last session are like, oh, her again. But I'm back with a new group of friends and happy to introduce you to this panel on renewable energy transition in the mainstream, which of course you'll hear a lot about from our friends today. I'm going to set up the conversation and introduce our speakers. But first, I'll introduce myself, Megan Zimmerman. I'm the Director of Business Development at Calgary Economic Development. I'm also a member of the Energy Futures Lab and really happy to be here. I'm really passionate about the future of energy and have a special place in my heart for what's happening in renewable energy here in the province as well. So a recent forecast by Rystad Energy says that the province of Alberta could become the Canadian leader in utility scale wind and solar by 2025. Rystad predicts that 83% of the combined utility scale wind and solar built in Canada over the next 5 years will be built in Alberta, which doesn't even include smaller installations such as rooftop solar. We all know that globally, the move towards renewable energy powered business is heating up. Some of the world's biggest companies and brands have committed to 100% renewable power. And you should be excited to know that Alberta has the opportunity to be a major provider of that power. Our deregulated power market means it's the only Canadian jurisdiction where renewable power can be purchased directly from developers. This, along with our globally competitive cost of utility scale solar and wind, the quality of our resource, the quality of our talent, makes this province a very attractive market. Alberta can provide those multinational companies with renewable power and also create new and long-term energy investment in Alberta. Those are just a few of the reasons I'm really excited to introduce you to today's panelists. Ruslans McMahon is joining us with Blue Earth Renewables. Ruslans is the Director of Market Development. Jordan Balaban is the CFO with Greengate Power Corporation. Graham Harrison is the CEO with Nutana Power. And last but certainly not least is Dan Chapman with Chapman Ventures and an expert on a lot of things energy storage. So I encourage you to bring your questions. This is a high-powered group that will be certainly able to help guide your thinking around renewable energy opportunities. So please, throughout the conversation, I will be monitoring the chat. And we'll get into the panel. So I want to ask all my panelists just to do a little bit of an introduction of yourself, who you are and what you're doing. But I think it would be really interesting for the students to hear more about your journey. So we don't need to go all the way back to kindergarten, but a little bit about, how you got to where you are in these roles and leading renewable energy projects in the province. So why don't we start, Dan, you're first on my screen here. Why don't we start with you?
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having us, Megan. The committee that's put this together, you got a great group of people, really excited to share with the students out there tuning in and anybody else. So I am a single man consultancy, not a single man, I'm married, but consultant that specializes in the energy storage space. But really is looking more broadly at the clean energy transition. And I know that's a key element of what we're talking about at this conference. How I got here was have a background in electrical engineering, graduated in 2005, so I've been in industry for a little over 15 years. Started, as many of you have probably or will be soon, working in engineering jobs focused on doing kind of more detailed engineering. Had an opportunity to join a very early NMAX, actually in their early entrance into the clean power space. Worked as one of two people in the entire organization that was working on clean energy starting back in 2006, and progressively moved to do shift more towards kind of the business side of things, doing business development, project development, and then had the bit of an epiphany that it's great to work in an organization, but I would love to work with multiple organizations and try to help multiple people and the folks that are trying to lead innovation in their organizations to see how energy storage could fit and how energy storage is a great addition to their mix and how it can help them grow and their companies grow in the future.
Great, Dan. Thank you. Graham, why don't you share a little bit about yourself and what you're doing with Nutana?
You bet. I can't hope to follow up on Dan, so I'm going to go a completely different route. I'll just give you a quick second here on my background. I have a background in the technology space. and the commercial world. I practiced law for 10 years, invest in various different tech companies. And, Nutana Power is really a company that I founded to address and help our customers harness the opportunities that are coming out of grid transformation and the results of widespread renewable deployment into the electrical grid, both at large scale and at smaller scales. Our work focuses on looking at new technological solutions and new ways of using technology to improve the balanceability and controllability of the power grid as time goes on, and renewables and the effects of inverter-based devices connected to the system create instabilities. So that's a little quick blurb about us and myself.
Awesome. Rosalind.
Yeah, well, I was thinking this is such a nice group, and although we've worked together, I didn't know the background. So I'll give you like the quick granular. I do have an engineering background as well. I'm a biochem engineer, actually, even though I work in power. I couldn't think in 3D. So for those mechanical engineers out there, I congratulate you. That was not my strength. I went on to do my MBA at Calgary. I specialized in global energy management and sustainable development. And I think all along, my journey, I have been focused, and I knew that I really wanted to work on something to do with environment or energy or renewables. And I think how I got to where I am today, which is with Blue Earth, as the director of market development with a company that I really like working with and an industry I like, was asking myself tough questions along the way. And I don't think we ever stop asking. So, first, when I came out of engineering, I was trying to figure out, what do I actually value? What would a successful career look like to me? And trying to be like as specific as possible as what that, like who I wanted to work with. Like Dan mentioned, do you want to work with lots of people? Do you want to work in a small company, a big company? And those answers changed. I worked at GE, which, had 150,000 people globally. And then now with Blue Earth, 120. And then asking lots of other people what they did. Now you have these conferences where you can ask people online, but I constantly took people out to coffee and kind of ferreted my way into power generation as a niche sector back in 2006.
We'll come back to that a little bit. Some of the learnings over the years, like you said, there's been a lot of change. But first, Jordan, why don't you tell people a little bit more about yourself? Maybe your mustache, which the speakers were already commenting on, and what when GreenGate Power is all about.
Yeah, so the mustache has been with me for about a week now, but I've been co-founder and CFO of GreenGate, which we founded in 2007. So just a bit about GreenGate. We're one of Canada's leaders in renewable energy, large-scale renewable energy projects. In terms of the word large scale, we developed two of the largest wind farms that are currently operating in the province, and we're currently working on one of the largest solar farms in North America, about the size of just over 2,000 football fields, to put it in perspective. So pretty large scale. I think it's important to kind of keep in mind, back in 2007, getting into renewable energy was a pretty fringe idea and pretty fringe opportunity, given what was going on in the province with $140 oil and all the benefits of being in the oil and gas industry at that time. But we felt we wanted to be in a business that was doing good for the environment. And we found that a business opportunity in developing large-scale renewable energy projects. And obviously the world has changed quite a bit since 2007, and now renewables are mainstream. But GreenGate sees ourselves as being on the forefront of kind of the mainstream of renewables.
That's awesome. Thank you. You and Ruslans set up the next conversation or question I have really well, which is, can you talk a little bit about how your business has changed, you know, in relation to the oil and gas cycles in Alberta since you've been operating, and, you know, how has that affected your business for good or for bad, or do you feel insulated from what's happening in the oil market? So why don't we start maybe with you, Jordan, since you're up, and then Rosalind, I'd love to hear from you from Blue Earth's perspective as well.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, as an entrepreneurial business, we've had plenty of ups and downs dealing with the financial crisis, various economic cycles that have been challenging. There's been times where there's been policies that have been implemented which have been quite unsupportive for our business. But I mean, we're at a time now where it seems like there's nothing but tailwinds for what we're doing, especially now that renewables are truly cost competitive with conventional forms of power generation. We're at a time where there's, you know, insatiable appetite from investors to be investing in renewables. So, I mean, it really does feel like we're at this very important and very monumental inflection point. I think it seems obvious now that renewables are a good investment opportunity, but I would say for a long time in our business, that was certainly not the case, but very happy with where we are now.
Rosalind, what's your take?
Yeah, I was just going to kind of pick up on that. And like Jordan and Greengate, Blue Earth is a developer of renewable projects. So we do wind, solar, run-of-river hydro. We're across Canada and into the US. And I think that that foregone conclusion that it's a good investment is very much, you know, the feeling today. And I echo what Jordan said, you know, back in 2006, it was more of a fringe, you know, niche sector, right? Blue Earth is now 10 years old. So in that 10 years, when we were founded in 2010, the market for us looked a lot like, you know, it was a lot smaller. It was more niche. It was more driven by government policy and incentives. Crown utilities like, you know, BC Hydro, the ISO in Ontario, procuring on their timelines, you know, kind of large swaths of megawatts. Whereas now in that 10 years is really been the shift to companies driving it. And I think we'll probably get more into that with this discussion. But that's because companies are driving it, investors are driving it, things have escalated very quickly. So going from, you know, moving at sort of government pace to moving at private sector pace has been a big change. And in terms of, you know, being a renewable company in Alberta, and again, like mentioning 2007, $140 oil and what that looked like. And then now, even, you know, 2014 to 2018 was a really stark difference with Blue Earth's growth and Alberta, what was happening in sort of the macro environment. We were growing at sort of 50% at that during those 4 years. And even during COVID in this last 12 months have announced another over 100 megawatts of projects, over 200 million of investment. So I think I wouldn't say we're insulated from what's going on, but we definitely do operate on a different sort of curve, if you will, than the oil and gas sector historically.
So Rosalind, while we're on the topic, when you kind of talk about the curve, I think there's I kind of mentioned it in my intro around, you know, the corporate procurement of renewable energy. And there's been some great examples recently, and probably Jordan wants to comment as well. But could you speak a little bit to the fact that one of Canada's largest banks has just, you know, struck a pretty interesting deal that you guys are involved in here in Alberta, and, you know, what that means and kind of what that is, I guess, predicting for the future here and the opportunity, because I think that's quite unique. And I think maybe something the students aren't as familiar with.
Yeah, for sure. So we announced with RBC and Bullfrog Power our 39 megawatt solar facility, which is under construction now. We were lucky to be partners in that, and it got a lot of really great press. And I don't want to speak for our partners, but I think maybe using that as a case study to what, like you say, what what is to come and what's happening right now is, we are, as renewable energy developers, our product is renewable electricity. And in order to have that market grow, we need a few things. So we need the demand and investment. We need a great resource, and we need stable policies. So the demand and investment part is where you're seeing companies that are driven by, a number of things. Their shareholder who are saying, you need to have a plan to net zero. The cost of power, now they're able to buy renewables cheaper than they could buy off the grid. And they may have, in the case of 260 companies, like 100% renewable goals specifically. So that's driving a lot of demand for our product. In terms of our resource, the public call that Alberta did back a couple years ago under the NDP really showed that we do have the most competitive resources in wind and solar, with the average cost that came in around $40 for that product. So that kind of speaks to why the conversation has shifted from, is this a good idea, to why shouldn't we procure renewable power for our facilities? And then policy, you mentioned, our deregulated market. That's a huge thing. What that means is that we can actually transact buyers and sellers together. So if a company wants to buy renewable energy and have the clean electricity and the attributes, they can do that directly with us, developers in Alberta. It's the only market currently where you can actually do that. So I think I'm also, like some others on the call, on the advisory board for the Business Renewable Center. And just, we're by 2025, predicting that this could be up to 2 gigawatts of new renewables driven specifically by these corporate purchase agreements. And that's, $4 billion. So it's significant.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I hear a lot, and I'm sure you do as well, from the community that doesn't understand this industry is, oh yeah, renewables, they're always boosted up and backed by government. And I think this is a great example that this is market driven, and this is what investors want. The cost of renewables and these opportunities, I think it's important for students to know, because maybe their parents don't know, and I hear it all the time, that this is being led by the market and competitive, like you said, if not more cost efficient than other types of power. So I think that's really important, right? Because that is kind of the day we're in today with renewables. Jordan, do you want to speak? I know you guys are really involved with the Business Renewable Center and this corporate procurement piece. Anything you want to add to Ruslans' comments?
Yeah, so just quickly, so GreenGate is a co-founder of the Business Renewables Center. I think it's important to appreciate that corporate procurement has been going on in other markets for quite some time. So it's been a very active market in the US, very active market in Europe. It's relatively new in Canada. But like Ruslans was saying, given the dynamics of the market in Alberta, where a deregulated power market makes it very attractive for these types of renewable procurements. And we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest in this market, which is fairly new, but I totally agree with Ruslans that you're going to see a lot more interesting companies and a lot more interesting press releases of companies that are buying renewables to clean up to meet their sustainability goals and clean up their environmental footprint.
I feel like you're hinting at the fact that some of those press releases might be coming out from GreenGate, Jordan. Stay tuned.
Maybe,
Stay tuned. Well, if for students that haven't heard of it, the Business Renewable Center is a great resource that kind of further articulates the opportunity in corporate procurement of renewables, and as well as some of the players in the market. So good call out to them. I'm going to shift gears a little bit kind of to some of the high tech stuff that I know Dan and Graham, it's close to their heart. And I think a lot of people understand tech is not a sector. Tech is obviously overlaid with every other industry, and it's part of the digitization and evolution of every industry. So I thought we could talk a little bit, maybe Graham, if you want to start, and I'm sure Dan will have some comments around meeting climate change goals and kind of the overlay of technology and how your business is kind of playing in that space, and really that opportunity for technology to be a path to, as we talk about net zero And maybe just some examples from your perspectives with Nutana, as well as Dan, your work.
Yeah, so I think my comments would really build on the foundation that Jordan and Rosalind laid down about, capital movement right now and
Yep.
competitiveness and market drivers here. What we're seeing is sort of two big things. One of them is, something that maybe has a particular flavor to it because we're in Alberta and we have an oil and gas heritage here. And number two is more broad globally. The first one is, from a technological perspective, here in Alberta, we have a really strong energy foundation for our provincial economy. And what we've seen happening, at least at Nutana, is, there's a question now coming out of oil and gas companies about, okay, we smell which way the wind is blowing. We're starting to smell which way the wind is blowing. How can we look towards a future where, energy systems integration and energy systems unification across liquids, hydrocarbons, things like hydrogen and electricity becomes a reality, because that, allows us to pursue our business models today while adapting them and evolving them to move into the future. And I think what we've seen, and I'd be interested to hear others' comments on this as well, but I think what we've seen is that technology plays the critical role in that, not just technology in terms of devices and widgets, but new business models that technology unlocks for existing players and new entrants in markets that, historically have the highest barrier to entry of any market that I can think of. I mean, space flight has become cheaper over the last 40 years than electricity. We're dealing with an area that is very difficult for people to enter, and I think this creates a new opportunity. The second thing we've seen, in terms of climate change and where this is going, is that energy systems unification is sort of one half of it. The other half of it is a focus on the work that everybody here is doing, which is renewable power, and more specifically on decarbonization through competition. In other words, relying on the economic advantages of renewables that are coming out of technologies like, manufacturing. You can manufacture solar panels using robots, they get cheaper. You can manufacture things at scale, they get cheaper. And so those, that relocation of the locus of the economy of scale from, the pressure vessel of a nuclear plant or a coal plant or whatever to the manufacturer is one great example of how technology is driving decarbonization through competition. So I guess that's sort of a couple of examples of what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, but that's great. Super relevant comments. Dan, do you want to build on what you've heard?
Yeah, I'd love to. Also, I wanted to take one tiny little step back. I think it's really interesting to think about the genesis of how kind of climate change and what it's taken to get to where we are today, where now we're talking about renewables, clean, the clean grid transition being very much in the here and now. And it hasn't always been that way. And I got to tip the hat to everybody else, here on the panel. Blue Earth and their, predecessor company, Canadian Hydro Developers, was developing and pushing a vision and a mandate that many people didn't believe in, as early as the 1990s, through some of their initiatives, building first of a kind projects across Canada, in Alberta and Ontario and BC and elsewhere. GreenGate has done the same and now is deploying projects, as they mentioned, at a massive scale. Nutana Power is looking at this, where the grid is going into the future and putting forward some amazing solutions to what the grid doesn't only need today, but will need tomorrow. And when I think about my path, I worked on, trying to sell within very large companies and had a lot of opposition within those large companies, the vision that solar is low risk, there's no moving parts. It's going to work and it's only getting cheaper. And look at this curve. It's cruising down. Energy storage, the same. Like personally, I developed the first energy storage project in Alberta, which came online. It was a huge undertaking to convince people that it was worth investing millions of dollars to do that project. Now we're talking about having mega projects in the province. And before, when I think in your intro, Megan, you mentioned that Alberta, is going to be the home of the best, wind and solar resources, and therefore the best, largest wind and solar fleet in Canada. I think add energy storage to that. That's going to be happening, and Alberta will become that as well. But when I founded my company back in 2016, I consulted and I determined, you know what, it was actually too early. There wasn't enough interest, there wasn't enough education. I couldn't make a living and put food on the table consulting on energy storage. So I joined a company that was wanting to deploy and develop energy storage, did that. And then after a couple of years realized, hey, the time is right. I'm going to relaunch this business. So and in developing this business, I thought long and hard about how, you know, who I wanted to serve to help achieve climate change goals within organizations. And my tagline for my company is serving innovators. And I believe everybody I work with is in that space. And I'm seeing clients in the oil and gas sector now looking to deploy more wind and solar. And they're not doing it just to put a picture of a wind turbine on their annual report and report it to shareholders anymore. They're doing it because they see economics and they see the long-term need for ESG targets, and that it's becoming now core to their business instead of something on the fringes. I've probably glossed over the actual question, but I hope that was of some interest or provided some context.
Yeah, I think so, Dan. And when you think about the audience today, they're third or fourth year or new grads, right? The history of kind of how we got to where we are today and the richness of experience that all of you have talked about, I think is important, right? And that is important context to, you know, I feel like you've paved the way, and Jordan talked about lots of ups and downs. I think getting into renewables today would be a lot less bumpy than it would have been 10, 15 years ago when some of you started. So it's important context, and you're welcome, students, for all the hard work of this group. We have lots of questions coming in. Yeah, go ahead, Rosie.
Can I just build on something Graham said? And I think
yes,
looking for the future, looking towards the future, something that's interesting. And when I was with GE, I worked in gas turbines. I think one of the things he said was the pace of change. And that's something that I don't think any of us would have predicted, how quickly things are changing. We saw the technology curves, you know, again, on the wind and solar costs, they've come down 70 and 90%, you know, over the last, in Blue Earth's life. And that we could sort of see, but the cost curves always beat the projections, which is impressive in itself. But because we're dealing with more of technology that is more like, you know, your iPhone than your traditional gas plant, things are able to accelerate at a pace that makes it really interesting for the future about how quickly our system can transform. So not just our wind and our solar and our storage, but on the demand side, you know, the electrification piece, transportation, home heating, and what that means, you know, to the broader picture of where our country is going. That's those sectors, transportation, home heating, and electricity, is 50% of our carbon output in our country. So that's really where the, you know, opportunity is. How do we make it bigger than just electricity?
Yeah, and just to add one more thing on that, I think, so an important aspect for enabling more renewable energy penetration is energy storage as a way for us to put more onto the grid. But I think it's important to understand the linkage between the electrification dynamic in terms of, you have all of these automotive companies that are now talking about not selling internal combustion engine vehicles by 2025 or by 2030. And so the benefit that the power industry is getting from all the innovations that are happening with EVs is really important, because it's really driving down the cost of energy storage at a rate that I don't think anybody expected.
Yeah. I just feel like maybe Dan or Graham have comments on the energy storage side. Do either of you want to add anything before I ask any more questions on that kind of technology piece?
Yeah, sure. Graham, I don't want to jump in if you want to take something, but I can make a quick comment.
No, go ahead.
I think the trend of electrification and the need to balance supply and demand and changing customer behavior on the supply and demand side flexibly is absolutely a key driver of the need for energy storage, like putting aside the economics of arbitraging electricity, buying low, selling high, offering services back to the electric grid because energy storage, particularly in the form of batteries and other fast acting devices, can provide an instantaneous response. There's a need from a commodity basis of electricity to move that, to store it and to redeploy it when it's needed. And energy storage can do that very effectively through the deployment of different technologies. Batteries for shorter duration, things like compressed air energy storage and pumped hydro, and new technologies coming out around thermal storage and gravitational based systems that can do that for longer durations, over many hours or days or even weeks, depending on the scale. So that trend of electrification is entirely dependent on things like storage. And then stepping above that, flexible devices, processes, and systems that can intelligently serve customers' needs in real time. And even more importantly, to predict ahead of time what will be required. And that steps outside of the realm of, solar panels and batteries to the smarts behind them, the control systems, those systems that are in place. And it's becoming increasingly powerful with data innovation through 5G networks, artificial intelligence, machine learning algorithms, and all of this coming together. And I think a real area that's going to be interesting, stepping outside of the electric grid, is how these innovations can enable a consumer, whether that's an individual consumer like us as people, or industrial consumers, to automate mundane or limited value add processes that they don't want to do. You think of, like, if people don't like going to the grocery store, you have smart fridges now that can see when you're getting low on milk, can order it and arrives at your doorstep. Think of those same sort of things like percolating across industries. And, we see some really powerful melding of electrification and data to really streamline this process and increase our standards of living and kind of corporate value propositions, and where to put resources and deploy resources most efficiently.
I'd just like to make one comment on top of that to build on something Jordan pointed out, which is this the falling cost of energy storage, in a way that wasn't expected. Really interesting piece of history for people who, are in the engineering space and students out there. If you want to learn about an interesting phenomenon that's happened early on in the, call it 180, 75 years ago in the power industry, energy storage was more widely used. Whether that was on a site-by-site basis, for example, there were devices that were widely marketed and used in Western Canada and the Western US called wind chargers, which was, essentially a wind turbine with a battery at the bottom of it. And before the advent of rural electrification, those types of devices were used by, people in rural life to provide themselves with the electricity they needed in order to, improve the completability and the success of their daily tasks. And so I think that, we've had this experience. There were pumped hydro facilities being built in Europe 100 years ago. We've known how to store energy for a long time. The Paris metro system has compressed air tanks in it that are used for energy storage, converting energy to and from electricity. Like, this isn't a new thing, but for a variety of historical reasons, we kind of lost that experience. And so, Jordan's point, I think, really is one that is important to drive home. The economics are such that energy storage is now becoming less and less expensive, more and more cost competitive, and is going to proliferate widely, both in the form of electric vehicles and in the form of standalone installations. And so the question is, how do we rediscover what we already knew and forgot? And I think that's a really important point here. From a technology perspective, some of this isn't new, it's old. We just need to dig back into it. Some of it is brand new. And as to the point Dan's made, from a large scale control systems perspective, if we've got 1 million electric cars driving around out there in Alberta, and each of them can act as a grid resource, how do we take that resource and harness it effectively? Because that's not something people know how to do easily right now in the context of the power industry.
you know, therein lies the opportunity for the students that are looking to solve these next big challenges, right? So I like that you kind of put it out there as this is work to be done, right? And we need the smartest minds in this province to work on that with us. So thanks for that. There's lots of questions. So I'm going to pivot from some of my questions that maybe you were preparing and get to the students, because we're here to answer their questions. So most of them are kind of to the panel. So I'll throw them out there, and whoever wants to answer, a couple pretty technical. So the one question I like here, how do you validate the carbon offset value of projects that you're working on in your businesses? So great question, obviously looking to understand some of the technical side of things. So over to whoever wants to answer.
I can start on that. So one of the things that is interesting is that Alberta was the first jurisdiction in North America to actually have a carbon pricing regime. So when I spoke about policy being an important part of having a market going forward, I was remiss to not state that the carbon policy is a big part of it. And within Alberta, we have offset protocols. Wind is, has a different one than solar that are, I can't actually go through it, but it's based on the grid intensity. So what the average grid is emitting in terms of carbon. And that, as you can expect, would go down over time as we add more renewables, and the price of carbon. So, which is going up over time. So if you're, that's, I don't know. I don't want to get into too much detail, but that's essentially the scope of it. You've got your carbon price. You've got kind of two factors going up. Your grid intensity is going to displace a certain amount of carbon by adding new renewables to the grid, and that factor is determined, and there's a protocol for it through Alberta Environment.
Can I add one really small? Oh, sorry, Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, go add to it.
Oh, I was just going to say, so the way that these carbon offsets or renewable energy credits are typically measured is by the power generated, so by the megawatt hour. So for every megawatt hour, every unit of energy that is produced and sold, so 1 megawatt hour has a renewable energy credit or carbon credit tied to that. And then that would be counted and then would be compensated for. So that's the metric of measured electricity that is used.
Yeah, just want to add, so the policy the policy is called the TIER program, TIER, Technology Innovation Emission Reduction Program. So if you do some Googling, you can certainly get into the details of the technical specifics of that. But just one more thing to add is so large emitters in our province that are above a certain emissions threshold have opportunities to basically use these carbon offsets to offset some of their compliance obligations and potential penalties they would be paying otherwise. So that's where you get this market is renewable projects provide these offsets that these large emitters can buy to offset their emissions.
Awesome. Shelley, I hope that answers your question. If you have a follow-up, put it in the chat, but that's great. You guys really built it out. I think you answered it perfectly. So thank you for that. The next question I want to ask that's come in through the students as well is around talent. So of course, they're all listening to you. They're excited about what you're doing. They're all looking for jobs or to pivot from a job they're in into renewables. So can maybe if each of you have kind of a thought on how can students best position themselves to work in this industry, right? So they may be already in oil and gas. They're looking to transition into renewable energy related projects or technology in this area, or they're just coming out of school and they really want to know how they break in. So what are your thoughts for them? Jordan, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so I would say just given how dynamic our industry is and how quickly it's changing, I think it's really important for somebody that we hire to prove that they're adaptable, that they're willing to learn, because things in this industry change very, very quickly, and you have to be on top of the trends and the curves to stay ahead of your competition. And I think the other thing is they need to prove that they're eager to innovate, eager to be part of innovation. So we don't necessarily look for the best candidates. I think we look for those that are interested in innovation.
Yeah,
Russ,
I'd add.
go ahead, Graham.
Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead, Russ.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll fire it in here. One of the things that I would like to point out, because this is a common misconception, is that, it doesn't need to be an either or decision here. The skills that are applicable to, fluids and liquids engineering are going to remain relevant to unified energy systems and integrated energy systems as we go forwards, both in terms of hydrocarbons and in terms of new, media to transmit power like hydrogen. And so if you look at, a future where you are capable of converting, for example, back and forth between hydrogen and electricity, and you think about the opportunities that opens up for somebody who's really, really good at moving around gases, there's a lot of skills that we have now that have a direct line of sight from here to that place. And I think that something that's really important to consider when you're looking at this is, how can I position myself such that I'm getting exposed to innovative ideas? And I think that's the thing that Jordan really hit on, in terms of hiring and in terms of where I think, students should be looking. It's places that, expand and allow and support creative innovation in the energy sector.
I agree with that. I agree definitely with the innovation. I think just for Blue Earth, we build, own, and operate our projects. So that means that we need people across the spectrum. We need people who can be on construction, development, legal, operations, finance, accounting, you name it. And we are a values-based company. So we really do, as we've grown over the last 10 years, and now that we're, approaching that magical sort of 150 mark, which is, when you start to become a big company, we have defined, more about what does it mean to be a Blue Earthling. And so when we hire, we look for, humility, agility, passion, persistence, and people who are proud of what they do. And I think that's what kind of ties back to my first comments on asking yourself consistently through your life. And I still do it. My most recent one was, I had my second child, and I decided, did I want to continue to work full time and be on this executive trajectory with GE? And that was a hard, asking yourself those questions allows you, actually knowing yourself, I think allows you to present an authentic person. And it also creates a sort of, energy and drive within you that I think is seen through people you meet with and your hiring companies, if you will. So not to get too deep on it, but I do think, it just comes down to, we're hiring people, and we want people who are, very passionate and obviously having an engineering and business degree is an amazing foundation.
Totally agree with everything that's been said. I think eager to innovate, and that, is also, happens as a cause of curiosity, but being constantly curious and constantly looking for the reasons why, and then applying that to think about what could be, and persistence as well. I think we've all developed things, whether it's companies, projects, relationships, where it's been hard. You have to keep on trying, and you have to keep really diligent. If any of us stopped what we were doing when we heard no the first time, or that it couldn't be done, or that it's impossible, or it'll never work, none of us would be talking to you today. And I think from a point of actually leaving school and looking for that first job, is the openness to start somewhere in an organization doing something that it may not be the thing you want to be doing or your ultimate goal, but to start building knowledge. You'll build knowledge, you'll grow and learn from the people around you. And then you can take that, synthesize it, apply that, and move into other roles, start developing an understanding of the sector, the business, and where this is moving. And then you'll have that opportunity to learn and grow. Because it can be, and this might sound a bit negative, but it can be difficult to do exactly what you want to be doing, in your first job, right as you exit school. unless you start your own startup and you're wildly successful and it works out. But most times you need to go out in industry, get some knowledge, get some experience, and bring that back to create that product and to have that understanding of how the whole business mechanism, and in our case, the electric sector mechanism works, to then to be able to deploy that, you know, in a startup, or as driving innovation, or being a contributor to innovation within an organization.
You guys will be happy to know that questions are coming in fast and furious. So I'm going to try to get through as many as I can. I'm going to challenge all my fellow panelists to try to give me quick hit answers so we can get through as many of them as we can. So thanks for all the students' interest. Dan, this is a question for you. Nathaniel's asking about advancement in thermal batteries for use in EVs. Are there large-scale advancements of thermal batteries that would allow for heat to be transferred over longer distances?
So advancements in thermal batteries that would allow heat to be transferred over long distances. I think there have been, and I may not have the most up-to-date thoughts related to thermal batteries within the EV space themselves. But typically most thermal battery systems are very heavy. So they're usually better situated for, call it, stationary storage solutions, or a power plant effectively of energy storage, than in mobile devices. The reason why you see lithium ion being ubiquitous across, for the majority, ubiquitous across the clean vehicle space, is because it has an extremely high energy density. So you can get a lot of both power and energy out of the device in a mobile device, where weight matters, right? The more something weighs, the more it costs to both manufacture, build, house, move, and the mobility aspects of it itself as it operates. So I haven't, to be honest, seen yet a compelling thermal energy storage technology for mobile uses. Probably the exception to that would be that there's some interesting thoughts around some thermal storage devices that might be used in the marine space, where there's concerns about having a product that can start on fire, as some lithium ion batteries can. And a lot of those problems have been mitigated, but the industry still sees it as an issue, and they don't want a cargo vessel to, you know, have any risk of starting on fire. So that's where I've seen that. And I realized, Megan, that was not a succinct answer at all. And I just realized that, and apologize.
I'll give you another chance, Dan. Okay, there's a great question here, and I think I'm going to throw it over to Jordan, because I hear GreenGate talk a lot about the and. Graham, you did as well. You might want to build on this. Juan Escobar asked a question about, he says, transition from fossil fuels to renewables is a reality, but it's a slow process that is still dependent on existing oil and gas technology. What is your opinion about people saying that renewables will completely displace fossil fuels?
Yeah, so I'd say, you know, in the short to medium term, there's still going to be a need for fossil fuels, and you know, fully supportive of our Canadian industry. We feel that if there's any fossil fuels that are being used globally, they should be Canadian fossil fuels. But I mean, you're seeing some pretty significant announcements that are going to have a very powerful and major impact on the demand side, with these automotive companies that are talking about not building internal combustion engines. You have countries that are banning internal combustion engine vehicles. So, I mean, it's you could see a time, you know, kind of further out, where other technologies could displace fossil fuels. And one technology pathway that's really interesting to me is hydrogen. Hydrogen is really interesting, especially if you can produce hydrogen with renewable energy and clean energy. So right now, electrolysis, which is the process to do that, is still quite expensive. But there is a lot of capital and a lot of innovation and smart minds that are going into figuring out ways to improve on scale and improve on cost. So just an example of just technology. It's really hard to underestimate the disruptive potential of technology. And we've certainly seen that with solar and wind. Like Roslyn was saying, solar's come down 90% in cost in the last decade, which is just mind blowing. So yeah, I'll stop there. Again, I'll try to be short.
Well, and I think you saw the question from Ryan. There was a question about hydrogen. So I don't know if anyone else wants to build on that. Hydrogen is certainly a hot topic.
Yeah, I'll throw one out there. So I think that it's important, you know, and maybe this is an answer to both of these questions. So I'll be extra economical on time here, Megan. The thing that, you know, you have to take a step back from, I think, is to separate out, you know, hydrocarbons as an energy storage medium from, you know, their use as a fuel for automotive purposes, for, you know, aviation, for marine applications. Hydrocarbons are still valuable and they're still worth extracting, even if we're not using them for gas. In fact, I would argue that there are other applications of hydrocarbons that are even more valuable. And you look at hydrogen as a medium. Hydrogen, it behaves in many ways like a hydrocarbon storage medium. I mean, it's kind of the root of it, right? From a chemical perspective. So, you know, looking at how hydrogen is going to be used in the future, I think you can see obvious analogies to Jordan's point in the transportation sector. It's storable as a fuel. It's usable as a fuel. We know how to do that with it. When we bring costs down through technology, that's very much interesting. I think the other side you have to look at is here in Alberta, you know, our extractive industries are posed not just to sit there and say, I guess we're not supplying gas anymore, that's the end of it, but to do other things, perhaps more valuable things with the hydrocarbons we have in the ground now. So, you know, while electrification may result in the limitation of fossil fuels as a fuel in the transportation sector, although, you know, the advent of cars doesn't mean people stopped using horses. At the same time, what we're going to see is, you know, a continuation of an economic pathway for the extraction of resources in Alberta to continue to be used, I believe.
I'm going to switch gears. Nuclear. So there's a question about nuclear. You know, more, I guess, just about whoever would like to comment on, you know, the likelihood of nuclear development for electricity generation in Canada, and what are some of the challenges facing that source of power. I know I didn't introduce any of you as nuclear experts, but
I'm not a nuclear expert. I think just to draw it back to maybe what we've been talking about here, I think what you're seeing is, and this isn't a surprise, economics drive growth. So when you're having, you know, wind, solar, and Dan and Graham talked a lot about the cost out of storage. And I would argue that storage is now on the trajectory of those technologies, or maybe faster because of their compounding effect that we've been talking about. Those technologies are, in cases, in many places, actually cheaper than existing gas. So I think you have to look at what, you know, it's not just that is a clean, carbon-free source of power, but what are the economics around it? And one of the other things I would just comment that we are seeing, because our pace of technology cost out is so quick, our project development cycle is short relatively to you know, large nuclear and large hydro projects. So by shortening the project timeframe, and it's even more so with storage, you take a risk out, you know, of that equation. For me to know what's going to happen in 10 years, it's a bit of a guess. Do I know what's going to happen in a year or 2 years? You can have a lot more cost certainty for that. So it kind of feeds on the first part of my argument, but I would take it to that discussion.
To add a little bit to that as well, and totally agree. The nuclear is interesting. It's conventional nuclear is very, very expensive. So as Ruslans said, you know, where solar is being built now for $1,000 a kilowatt, nuclear is $10,000 a kilowatt or above. So that's a very difficult capital hurdle to get over. There are new technologies that are being developed. The challenge really comes down to, in a place like Alberta, there isn't nuclear. So to get nuclear here, there has to be a regulatory construct set up that would allow it. And the stakeholdering around that will take a long time. So in the near to midterm, it has a bunch of hurdles to come over if it works. So as a near-term solution, probably not. if you're looking far to the future of 100% clean energy, you know, soup to nuts, everything in between, not just electricity generation, but the entire energy mix, you know, including nuclear in that mix may be a necessary a portion of it. I think the nearest term is for applications that require a high amount of electricity at a stable level, not volatile. Even though some nuclear proponents say it can ramp very well, it's difficult to see it ramping as well as something like gas or energy storage. And then an industrial application that requires heat as well, because it still will produce heat, which could be used, you know, as a byproduct in a valuable manner. But I think that's still quite a long ways down the road. And as Ruslan very accurately mentioned, the cost curves of things like solar and storage and wind are coming down so quickly that it becomes increasingly difficult to bridge that economic gap, because that economic gap is building for nuclear to compete.
Good answer. Thank you. So with our last minute, I'm just going to let the panel all answer this one question, which is, when you think about Alberta's energy future, what gives you the most hope? So Dan, do you want to start, or do you need a minute?
Oh no, I can keep talking.
All right, you're up.
I'll keep it brief so I don't suck up these. Oh shoot, last minute. Alberta, as an energy sector and as an electricity sector, is an open and competitive marketplace, and that sort of a construct breeds innovation, because you're always looking for that incremental way to be better, more efficient, lower cost in order to compete. And you know, that sort of market and innovative and entrepreneurial attitude is a great breeding ground for innovation.
Graham, final thoughts.
I think what gives me hope about Alberta and our energy sector here in our economy is that, you know, the stuff people are doing here right now is, you know, 5-10 years ahead of anywhere else on earth in the energy space, at least. And we have the talent here to pull it off before anybody else, you know, manages to get their hooks into the scale of the problem.
Ruslan.
The entrepreneurial spirit, and I'll build on an image from my son's Harry Potter book, which is a phoenix, which is born again out of the ashes. And, you know, we hear boom bust in our province, but that's actually a positive thing that creates innovation and, you know, energies in our blood.
And Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, in my highly biased opinion, I think Calgary is one of the best places in the world to live and work. I mean, if you look at Megan's background, I assume that's a background. I mean, we live here. It's unbelievable. But I mean, just kind of playing on the same theme, just anytime there's struggle, it's just an opportunity for innovation. So I think if we shift our mindset to appreciating that, I think we're in a really good spot.
So there you have it, friends. Thank you to the Alberta Student Energy Conference for having us. Dan, Graham, Ruslan, Jordan, a pleasure to know you all. And I'm sure you've inspired all the students. You're doing some really incredible work. That 5 and 10 years ahead, Graham, is led by people like you guys and the next generation of students that are going to join you. So thank you for the work. Thanks for the inspiration and your time. And thanks to the conference for having us. Have a great day.